Imagine a funeral interrupted by the chaos of war, where a fresh corpse is hastily thrown into the dusty tomb of a man who had been dead for years, only to instantly spring back to life the moment it touches his ancient bones. This is not a scene from a fantasy novel. It is the final haunting testimony of the prophet Elisha, a man so saturated with God's presence that even death could not extinguish the power within him. From calling down chariots of fire to blinding entire armies and making iron float on water, Elisha's journey is a relentless display of the supernatural invading the natural world. But how does a simple plowman transform into a vessel of such terrifying and beautiful authority? Before we unravel the mystery of the double portion, make sure you are subscribed to Bible and History, hit that like button, and share this video to help us bring these powerful ancient truths to a modern generation. Prepare your heart and open your mind, because the story we are about to tell reveals the unseen armies of heaven that are still fighting for you today. There was a prophet in Israel whose name eventually carried enough weight to shake the foundations of the kingdom, a man named Elisha, to whom kings sent desperate messengers, generals crossed hostile borders seeking help, and widows clung for hope when their jars were empty and their futures seemed bleak. He was a man who moved with such authority that he could turn bitter, poisonous water sweet with nothing more than a bowl of salt, who multiplied a single jar of oil until a family's crushing debts were erased, who healed a foreign commander of a disease that no army could conquer, and who once struck an entire enemy force with blindness, leading them helpless like children into the hands of Israel. Yet, perhaps the most haunting and undeniable proof of the power that rested upon him did not happen while his heart was beating, but rather years after he had been buried, when his tomb was sealed and silent, and in the panic of a funeral interrupted by raiders, a fresh corpse was hastily thrown into Elisha's grave, and the moment that lifeless body touched the prophet's ancient bones, death released its grip. The man's eyes opened, his chest rose, and he stood up alive in the darkness, proving that God's power can cling to a faithful servant so completely that even death cannot wash it away. But before we unravel how a man becomes that dangerous to the kingdom of darkness, make sure you are subscribed to Bible and History, hit the like button, and share this video to help us bring these ancient truths to a modern generation, because this is the story of Elisha, a journey that did not begin with miracles but in an ordinary field on an ordinary day, with a man who had no idea that the very soil beneath his feet was about to become holy ground. It began with the rhythm of hard work, the smell of overturned earth, and the steady breathing of 12 yoke of oxen, a sign that Elisha came from a hard-working family, living a life that was predictable, stable, and quiet, which is often precisely where God chooses to move. There was no fanfare when the prophet Elijah approached him. No trumpets sounding from the heavens, just the silent, heavy weight of a mantle, the symbol of prophetic authority being cast across Elisha's shoulders for a brief moment before being lifted again, a gesture that carried the weight of a divine invitation that needed no words. Elisha understood instantly that this was a summons to leave everything he knew, so he ran after Elijah, not with hesitation, but with a request to kiss his parents goodbye, a sign of honor before he stepped into a life he could not fully understand. Elijah's response offered him freedom, yet it was a test of his resolve, and Elisha's reaction was immediate and absolute. He returned to his field not to pack, but to burn the bridge to his past, dismantling the plow that represented his livelihood and using its wood to cook the oxen, serving them as a farewell feast to his community. It was a declaration written in smoke and fire that there would be no turning back, no safety net, and no plan B, for a life once grounded in the fields would now be shaped entirely by the voice of God. With the fire of his past behind him and the mantle of his destiny ahead, Elisha followed Elijah as a servant, walking in the shadow of a man whose footsteps would train his heart for the impossible. teaching him a steadiness and sensitivity to God's movements that can only be learned in silence and service. As the years passed, the day finally came when the atmosphere shifted, when Elijah's steps grew slower and his voice quieter, as if he carried a secret that the earth itself was waiting to hear. And they began a final pilgrimage from Gilgal, a place of beginnings, where Elijah tested Elisha's loyalty by urging him to stay behind, speaking with a protective tone, like a father shielding a son from coming pain. But Elisha, whose resolve had been forged through years of pouring water on the prophet's hands, refused to let distance separate what God had joined, answering with a vow that he would not leave Elijah's side. A scene that repeated itself at Bethel and again at Jericho, where the sons of the prophets whispered anxiously about the Lord taking their master away, words that Elisha acknowledged with a reverence that said some moments are too sacred to be dissected by idle talk. Loyalty became the language spoken between them in the silence of that long walk, until they reached the banks of the Jordan River, where Elijah rolled up his mantle and struck the water, causing the river to obey and pull back, allowing them to cross on dry ground, just as their ancestors had done centuries before. Standing on the far side, with the journey reaching its final steps, Elijah turned and asked the question that would define the future of a nation. "What shall I do for you before I am taken from you?" And Elisha, ignoring requests for safety, wealth, or fame, asked for the hardest thing possible, a double portion of Elijah's spirit. A request not born of greed, but of a readiness to carry the heavy burden of spiritual leadership. Elijah admitted that this was a hard thing, granting it only if Elisha possessed the spiritual sight to see him as he was taken. And as they walked on, speaking softly words of farewell, the wind began to change, growing warmer and heavier until the air trembled with a sound too alive to be wind and too fierce to be thunder. Suddenly, a blaze of glory tore through the horizon as a chariot of fire pulled by horses of fire descended between them with a force that shook the ground, flames moving like living light that did not consume the earth but carried a presence that made even the silence feel holy. Elisha staggered back, his heart pounding with deep, reverent awe as the chariot separated him from his master, and he watched Elijah being lifted toward the heavens in a whirlwind, his figure rising through the light and flame, carried by a power no human eye can fully comprehend. In that moment of overwhelming glory and loss, Elisha cried out from the depths of his spirit, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen," watching until the fire faded and the sky returned to its stillness, leaving him alone with nothing but the mantle that had fallen from Elijah's shoulders, the same mantle that had once been placed on him in a quiet field, now heavy with the promise of a double portion and the beginning of a new era. Elisha stood alone, tearing his own clothes in two, a visceral sign of the grief that crashes over the soul when a great chapter closes and a beloved mentor is gone. But he did not stay in that place of mourning for long. He reached down and picked up the mantle that had fallen from the sky, the fabric feeling familiar to his touch, yet undeniably heavier now, charged with a terrifying responsibility and a divine promise that rested solely on his shoulders. He walked back toward the banks of the Jordan, the waters rushing violently before him, a barrier that separated him from his mission and the people he was called to lead. And holding the mantle high, he struck the river and spoke the words that would define the rest of his life, asking, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And the river answered immediately, dividing without hesitation to open a path for him to cross, proving that while the prophet may change, the God who commands nature remains the same. From a distance, the sons of the prophets watched this scene unfold, and in that moment their uncertainty dissolved into understanding. For they saw that the spirit which had rested on Elijah now rested on Elisha. A new prophet had risen, and heaven had made it unmistakably clear. When Elisha returned across the Jordan, these men met him with a mixture of reverence and lingering grief. For while they respected the power he carried, their hearts still wrestled with the absence of Elijah. Yet Elisha did not try to prove himself with speeches or displays of ego, but simply walked with the quiet steadiness of someone entrusted with a task far greater than himself. Soon after, messengers from Jericho approached him, describing a city that was beautifully situated, surrounded by fertile land and strong walls, yet cursed by a hidden problem that poisoned their future. The water source was corrupted, causing sickness, robbing the soil of its strength, and turning their hope into a constant struggle against death. Elisha listened to them not just as a judge, but as a healer who understood the weight of their suffering, and he asked for something unusual, a new bowl filled with salt, which he carried to the spring itself, the very heart of their need, and declared, "This is what the Lord says, I have healed this water." And from that day forward the spring flowed with purity, a miracle that carried the assurance that God still moved among his people to restore what was broken. If you are finding strength in these stories of restoration and power, this is the perfect moment to subscribe to Bible and History, hit the like button, and join us as we uncover how God's hand moves through history to shape our present. Not long after healing the waters, Elisha traveled toward Bethel, a region where spiritual compromise had hardened the culture. And as he approached, a group of young men, not innocent children, but a gang of youths already shaped by a spirit of rebellion, came out to confront him, mocking not just the man, but the God he served. They taunted him, shouting, "Go up, you bald-head, go up!" echoing the sacred event of Elijah's ascension with dripping sarcasm, essentially telling God's representative to disappear just as his master had, revealing a deep-seated contempt for the prophetic office. Elisha stopped, the road falling quiet around him, and realizing this was a spiritual sickness that threatened the reverence of the entire nation, he pronounced a curse in the name of the Lord, and immediately 2 bears emerged from the woods to scatter the group, a terrifying and sobering reminder that the presence of God is not something to be treated lightly or mocked. Elisha continued on his journey, carrying a mantle that demanded both compassion and courage, knowing that every step he took revealed a different facet of the God he served. Among those who sought him out, one woman came with a quiet desperation that breaks the heart. She was the widow of a man who had feared the Lord, a faithful servant who had died, leaving her with nothing but crushing debt and a creditor coming to take her 2 sons as slaves. She faced Elisha with the honesty of a heart on the edge of ruin, and he listened with a gentleness that made room for her pain before asking the question that changed her perspective. "Tell me, what do you have in your house?" To which she replied that she had nothing, absolutely nothing, except a small jar of oil. To her it seemed useless, but to God it was the seed of a miracle, and Elisha told her to borrow as many empty vessels as she could, go inside her home with her sons, and close the door, an instruction to shut out the fear and the creditors, and to trust God in the privacy of her own faith. She began to pour, and the oil flowed, filling vessel after vessel, contradicting every law of nature, and it only stopped when there were no more containers to fill, allowing her to pay her debts and live on the rest, teaching Israel that God does not need our abundance. He only needs our willingness and our empty vessels. As Elisha continued traveling through the northern regions, one household in the town of Shunem began to stand out, marked by the unusual kindness of a wealthy woman who possessed a spirit of discernment, recognizing the presence of God through the quiet authority Elisha carried. Over time, her hospitality deepened into something intentional, and she proposed to her husband that they build a small upper room for the prophet, a sanctuary furnished with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, a simple space that carried the quiet honor of a heart that valued the things of God above her own comfort. Elisha felt the sincerity of her generosity and wanted to bless her in return, and when he learned she had no child and her husband was old, he called her to the doorway of that room and spoke a promise she had buried long ago to protect her own heart. He declared that within a year she would hold a son in her arms, a word that made her breath catch somewhere between longing and fear, for hope once buried can feel dangerous when it begins to rise again. Yet God was faithful to the word of his prophet, and the child was born just as Elisha had said. Caught somewhere between longing and fear, the woman held on to the promise, for hope once buried can feel dangerous when it begins to rise again. Yet God was faithful to the word of his prophet, and the child was born just as Elisha had declared, bringing laughter into a home that had been silent for too long. But years later, that laughter was silenced in an agonizing instant when the boy collapsed in the harvest field, clutching his head and crying out to his father, only to die hours later in his mother's arms. Grief does something strange to time, making hours stretch into forever and memories feel sharper than reality. But this woman, possessed by a fierce resolve that refused to surrender to despair, did not dig a grave. Instead, she carried her son up to the prophet's room and laid his lifeless body on the very bed where Elisha had rested, believing that the God who gave life could restore it. She saddled a donkey and rode with a desperate urgency to find the man of God. And when she reached Elisha at Mount Carmel, she clung to his feet, her soul bitter within her, refusing to leave him until he came. Elisha returned with her to Shunem, walked into that quiet upper room, shut the door upon them twain, and prayed unto the Lord, stretching himself upon the child until the warmth of life began to fight back the coldness of death. Breath returned. The child sneezed 7 times, and his eyes opened, restoring a son to his mother, and proving to Israel that the God who gives life does not abandon what he has given. Far to the north, in the kingdom of Aram, lived a man who stood in stark contrast to this grieving mother, a man named Naaman, the commander of the Syrian army, who was celebrated for victories that shaped nations and whose armor carried stories of triumph. Yet beneath that shining metal lived a quiet, devastating truth that threatened to erode everything he had built. Naaman was a leper. No military strategy could conquer this enemy, and no amount of reputation could shield him from the decay of his own skin, proving that even the strongest men eventually discover the terrifying limits of human strength. In his household lived a young Israelite girl, a captive taken during a raid who had every reason to be bitter, yet compassion shaped her voice when she told her mistress that there was a prophet in Samaria who could heal him, a reminder that hope often speaks through the most unlikely people. Desperate enough to listen, Naaman traveled to Israel with a caravan of silver and gold, expecting a grand ceremony worthy of his rank. But instead of coming out to meet him, Elisha sent a simple messenger with an instruction that felt almost insulting: "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times." The instruction stung Naaman's pride, for the rivers of Damascus were clear and grand, while the Jordan was muddy and humble, and he turned away in a rage, ready to ride home with his leprosy rather than submit to a foolish command. But his servants, men who loved him enough to speak truth to power, urged him to reconsider, asking if he would have done a great thing had the prophet asked it. So why not do this small thing? Reluctantly, Naaman stepped down from his chariot and into the muddy waters of the Jordan, dipping himself once, twice, 3 times with no change. But as he persisted in obedience, something shifted, and on the 7th time he rose from the water with skin as restored and fresh as that of a young child. If you are moved by the power of a God who heals the broken and humbles the proud, this is the perfect time to subscribe to Bible and History. Hit the like button and share this video, because these stories remind us that obedience often opens doors that strength cannot. Naaman returned to Elisha, no longer a commander seeking recognition, but a humbled man acknowledging the God of Israel, asking for 2 mule loads of earth to take back to Syria so he could worship the Lord on Israelite soil, proving that his transformation went far beyond his skin. It was a total reorientation of his heart. Not long after, near the banks of the Jordan, the sons of the prophets faced a much smaller yet deeply practical crisis as they expanded their dwelling place to accommodate their growing community. As they cut down trees near the river, one of the young men swung his axe, and the iron head flew from the handle, splashing into the murky water and sinking instantly to the bottom. To a wealthy man, this would be a minor inconvenience, but to this student, it was a disaster because the tool was borrowed, meaning he now faced shame, debt, and a burden he could not pay. He cried out to Elisha, "Alas, master, for it was borrowed." And Elisha, who had dealt with kings and armies, did not dismiss the young man's worry, but asked, "Where did it fall?" Elisha cut a stick and threw it into the water at that spot, and against all laws of nature, the heavy iron rose to the surface and floated, allowing the young man to reach out his hand and take it. This quiet miracle whispered a profound truth to every generation, that the God who governs the cosmos also cares about the lost keys, the unpaid bills, and the small anxieties that keep us awake at night, affirming that you are seen and your struggles matter. But the peace of the prophetic school was soon shattered when the king of Syria, frustrated that his battle plans were constantly being revealed to the king of Israel by Elisha, decided to hunt the prophet down. He sent a massive army with horses and chariots by night to surround the city of Dothan, encircling the hills with a ring of steel and impending doom. When Elisha's servant woke early in the morning and went out, his breath caught in his throat as he saw the horizon filled with the glint of spears and the mass of soldiers, an overwhelming force sent for just one man. Panic seized his heart, and he ran back to Elisha, his voice trembling with the terror of a man who sees no way out, crying, "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" seeing only the reality of the threat and the hopelessness of their position. But Elisha did not rise in alarm, nor did he rush to pack his bags. Instead, he looked at his servant with a calmness that felt almost unnatural in the face of death and said softly, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." To the servant, Elisha's words made absolutely no sense because fear has a way of blinding us to reality, leaving him asking, "More? Where?" As all he could see was the cold steel of the Syrian army closing in, making the prophet's peace feel impossible to grasp. Then Elisha prayed a simple prayer that changed everything. "Lord, open his eyes so that he may see." And instantly the room fell quiet as something shifted in the atmosphere, like a heavy veil being lifted from the physical world. The servant blinked and looked again, and what he saw shattered every fear he held. For the mountains surrounding Dothan were not empty. They were ablaze with heavenly fire, filled with horses and chariots of flame standing in ranks beyond counting, a supernatural wall glowing with the brilliance of another world. The massive army of Syria suddenly looked small, insignificant next to the ancient strength that had always been there, invisible until God chose to reveal it. And as the servant gasped, his terror drained away, replaced by an overwhelming awe. Elisha prayed again, this time asking God to strike the enemy with blindness, and in an instant, confusion swept through the Syrian ranks as their eyes remained open yet could no longer perceive reality, leaving them stumbling and disoriented, unable to recognize the very man they had come to seize. Elisha walked out to them, unafraid and untouched, guiding the entire army all the way to Samaria, leading them straight into the hands of the king of Israel, who, startled by this miraculous delivery, asked if he should slaughter them. But Elisha shook his head and chose a higher way, commanding the king to feed them, give them water, and send them back to their master, proving that mercy speaks louder than retaliation. And because of this act of grace, the Syrians did not attack Israel again for a long time. The victory at Dothan was won not by swords, but by sight, true sight, the kind that looks beyond circumstances, beyond fear, and beyond what human eyes can perceive, teaching us that the greatest battles of our lives are often won by remembering that we are never surrounded by the enemy, but are always surrounded by God. Years passed. Kingdoms shifted, kings rose and fell, and the once young farmer who had run after Elijah grew old, his steps slowing even as his spirit remained undimmed, until the day came when Elisha took to his bed, and the man who had carried God's power in every season of his life breathed his last and was lowered into a tomb. The story should have ended there in the silence of the grave. But the God who called Elisha on an ordinary day in the fields had one final statement to make. Sometime after his burial, during a time of war, a group of Israelites were hastily burying a man when they saw raiders approaching, and in their terror they abandoned the ceremony and threw the dead body into the nearest grave, which happened to be Elisha's. The moment that cold, lifeless corpse touched the prophet's ancient bones, a surge of power defied the laws of nature. Breath filled the man's lungs, his eyes snapped open, and he stood to his feet, alive and restored, awakened by the lingering overflow of the anointing that still rested on Elisha. This final miracle pointed to a truth far greater than the prophet himself, declaring that God's power extends beyond human limits, that his faithfulness does not die when his servants do, and that he can breathe life into places the world has already declared dead. Elisha's story does not fade quietly into history. It lingers like a steady flame, shaped by obedience and crowned by a legacy that outlived his own heartbeat, creating a portrait of a life fully surrendered to God, bold enough to ask for a double portion, humble enough to serve, and fearless enough to confront kings. The plow abandoned in the field reminds us that calling interrupts comfort. The floating axe head shows us that no need is too small. The army of fire tells us we are protected, and the man raised from the dead promises that with God, it is never too late. Now the question turns toward you. What would your life look like if you believed that the same God who stood with Elisha stands with you today? What fear would loosen its grip on your heart? And what unanswered prayer would you dare to bring before him again? Elisha's story invites us to stop watching from a distance and to start walking in faith, following his posture of saying yes to God before knowing where the path leads. Your story is not finished, and there are pages yet unwritten. If this journey has stirred something in your heart, a hunger for courage, clarity, or a deeper walk with God, then you are in the right place. Please subscribe to Bible and History, like this video, and share in the comments which moment of Elisha's life spoke to you the most tonight. We explore these stories because they anchor us and remind us that God still moves in ways we cannot explain but can always trust. Until the next video, may the God of Elisha walk with you in every step you take.